On the 27th of March, 1982, Donald Weltner led his two sons deep inside Crooked Swamp Cave in New Jersey. But what started as an enjoyable day for father and sons soon turned tragic when Donald fell headfirst into a tiny crevice where every breath of his became labored as the extremely cold tunnel pushed him further into hypothermia. Outside, rescuers worked tirelessly for days, but every attempt to pull him free only seemed to make things worse. As hope slipped away, one question remained. Could they reach him in time, or had the cave already claimed its victim? This is the tragic story of the incident at Crooked Swamp Cave. It was a crisp spring morning in Sussex County, New Jersey, when Scoutmaster Donald Weltner gathered his Boy Scout troop for what was supposed to be an unforgettable adventure. The destination was Crooked Swamp Cave, a sprawling limestone labyrinth tucked away in Lafayette's serene Blue Heron Park. The group comprises 12 enthusiastic boys, another scoutmaster named Jim, and Weltner's two sons, Christopher and Roger, 14 and 11 years old. Donald Weltner, a state police sergeant with over 2 decades of service, was no stranger to the thrill of exploration. An experienced spelunker, he often guided Troop 116 of Millstone Township on cave expeditions, teaching the boys resilience. This, however, was their first visit to Crooked Swamp Cave. Crooked Swamp Cave was a system of interconnected passageways that spanned 1,250 feet, the longest known cave system in New Jersey. But despite its picturesque surroundings, the cave held an air of mystery. With its maze of tight crevices and twisting passages, it was a challenging terrain that demanded caution and expertise. Weltner emphasized the importance of teamwork and adherence to the rules. Jim echoed his sentiments, ensuring everyone understood the gravity of the expedition. However, the opening to the cave was their first challenge, an omen of what was to come. Barely larger than a mailbox, it measured 16 inches high and 28 inches wide, and required crawling on hands and knees to enter. Despite the challenges, the boys were brimming with excitement. For them, this wasn't just a trip, it was a chance to conquer the unknown under the watchful eyes of their scoutmasters. The group made their way into the cave at about 2 p.m. that Saturday. Weltner led the way, crawling headfirst into the opening, followed closely by his sons. Behind them, the other 12 boys and Scoutmaster Jim followed, their flashlights illuminating the walls of the narrow passage. The air inside was cool, a steady 57 degrees year-round, and the walls were smooth but damp. After several minutes of tight crawling, the narrow passage opened into a relatively spacious chamber known among spelunkers as the 5-foot-high room. Here, the group could stretch their limbs a little and catch their breath. It was in this room that the group paused to reassess their plan. Weltner decided to lead his sons into one of the smaller tunnels not charted in the maps. It was a cone-shaped passage that narrowed as it went deeper, requiring them to crawl once again. Christopher and Roger, trusting their father's experience, were eager to see what they would discover. They followed him into the narrow passage, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The narrow tunnel was tight, but Weltner, experienced and confident, believed it was worth exploring. As a scoutmaster and seasoned spelunker, he knew it was crucial to assess the passage's safety before allowing others to proceed, and this was exactly what he did. But things soon started to get out of hand. The tunnel walls closed in quickly, forcing Weltner to lay completely flat on his stomach. His sons followed closely behind, mimicking his movements as they shimmied through the passage. At first, progress was manageable, though slow. The passage sloped downward slightly, and the mud beneath their hands and knees made it wet and slippery. Weltner called back to his sons every few moments, reassuring them and encouraging them to keep going. But as the tunnel narrowed further, their father's pace slowed. The passage ahead appeared to curve sharply, forming a tight, downward angle, He paused to inspect the area, his flashlight revealing a barely visible crevice that continued even deeper into the cave. Weltner inched forward cautiously, his body pressed tightly against the cave walls. The limestone seemed to close in on him, the narrow passage forcing him to twist and adjust his shoulders with each movement. Then, suddenly, the ground beneath him shifted. The mud, wet and slippery, gave way beneath his weight. Before he could react, he slid forward abruptly, his body plunging into an impossibly narrow crevice. Christopher and Roger watched in horror as their father disappeared into the crevice. Weltner struggled to move, but the hole had wedged him in tightly. His shoulders and chest were pinned by the unforgiving limestone, and his head was forced downward at a sharp angle. His arms were trapped at his sides, leaving him unable to push or pull himself free. Weltner's sons were thrown into panic. He quickly shouted for them to get help before they would attempt to free him and get themselves stuck. The darkness of the crevice enveloped him completely, and with every passing moment, his chances of escape grew thinner. Christopher and Roger emerged from the narrow tunnel. They rushed to Scoutmaster Jim, who was helping the other boys explore a safer section of the cave. Jim quickly followed the boys back to the tunnel, crawling through the tight passage until he reached the crevice where Weltner was trapped. He assessed the situation, shining his flashlight into the narrow space. Weltner's body was firmly wedged, his entire body pinned. Jim attempted to pull him free, but couldn't. The angle of the crevice and the slick mud made it impossible to get any leverage. Realizing the severity of the situation, he crawled out of the cave to call for emergency services. Rescue teams began arriving at Crooked Swamp Cave, bringing with them specialized equipment and a renewed sense of urgency. However, the cave's tight and treacherous passages presented significant challenges. The rescuers, many of whom were experienced spelunkers, had to crawl and contort their bodies just to reach the site where Weltner's body was trapped. Initial attempts to free him using ropes proved futile. The rescuers found that pulling on his legs only caused him to become more firmly lodged. Recognizing the need for a more delicate approach, they resorted to chisels and small jackhammers, carefully breaking away the limestone around him. Progress was painstakingly slow, and every movement risked causing further harm. Despite their best efforts, the hours of work yielded only minimal results. The cold, unyielding environment of the cave began to take its toll on both the rescuers and their hopes for a swift resolution. At 7:30 p.m., rescuers brought things like an electric heater and warm water bottles to the narrow tunnel in an effort to keep Weltner warm. But none of this could help Weltner against the hypothermia that was slowly killing him. Weltner, aware of the seriousness of his predicament, asked one of the rescuers to notify his wife. By midnight, his physical condition also began to deteriorate, and he started talking incoherently. The tight crevice restricted circulation to his lower body, and his position made breathing increasingly difficult. Rescuers worked tirelessly, but the unyielding limestone and confined space made progress painfully slow. Every hour that passed added to the growing sense of urgency and despair. In the midst of the rescue operation, Lynn and Nancy Taylor, two petite and experienced cavers, were called to the scene. The sisters had spent years exploring caves and were renowned for their ability to navigate the most constricted spaces. Their size and expertise made them ideal candidates for reaching Weltner. Equipped with helmets and headlamps, the Taylors crawled through the narrow, winding passages toward Weltner's position. The crevice was barely wide enough for them to maneuver, but they pressed on, determined to assist. It wasn't until 6 a.m. the next day that the sisters could get close enough to detect residual body heat still present in his mid-thigh area. But even that small sign of life offered little hope. It was clear that ordinary methods of extraction would not be sufficient. As the hours wore on, the combined efforts of the rescuers grew more desperate. The task of freeing Weltner from his entrapment seemed increasingly insurmountable. Despite tireless work of the cave rescue teams, his condition continued to worsen. His body, strained by the prolonged position and lack of circulation, began to show signs of severe distress. The decision was made to attempt one final extraction, but time was running out. At around 10:45 p.m. that day, Dr. Lucien Fletcher, a member of the rescue team, entered the rocky excavation tunnel to assess Donald's condition. After a brief examination, he confirmed what many had feared. Donald Weltner had passed away. As the news of his passing was relayed to the team, the operation shifted focus. With Weltner now confirmed dead, the primary concern was removing his body from the cave. The rescue team, already exhausted from days of painstaking work, proceeded with the difficult task of extraction. Using chisels, jackhammers, and ropes, they worked through the layers of rock that had kept Weltner trapped for so long. It took several more hours, but finally, the last of the surrounding rocks were removed. By early Monday evening, a harness was finally fitted around Weltner's chest, and rescuers managed to move him 2 feet toward a 20-foot shaft they drilled the previous day. However, any further progress proved impossible, and by midnight, quarrying was the only viable solution. The operation transitioned into a process of blasting, backhoe work, and drilling, with Weltner's body sustaining post-mortem injuries as a result. After several more hours of painstaking work, his body was finally recovered at 11:40 p.m. on Tuesday. Do you think rescuers should have made the decision to drill a shaft sooner? Would that have saved Weltner's life? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more like this.